The Pitch Hill project was a year-long investigation into one particular lay crossing Surrey, just south of Guildford and Reigate. It was found by dowsing to be particularly wide and strong, more so than any other found to date. It all started when on November the 7th, 1990, Eileen Grimshaw and Gordon Millington were on Pitch Hill investigating the site of a UFO. They climbed to the triangulation point at the top of Pitch Hill, and both of them dowsed a very wide band of energy there. The weather was dry, cold and windy at the time. They also found other less strong lines of energy crossing the hillside between the triangulation point and the car park, but nothing as strong as this very wide one. On the 11th of October, Gordon and Eileen reported this to Jimmy Goddard at the Surrey Earth Mysteries Group meeting, and a lay was found on the map, seemingly coincident with the dowsed band, passing through a number of points, including about a mile of coincident track to the east. The first field trip of the project was on Saturday the 17th of November 1990, when Jimmy Goddard, Gordon Millington and Eileen Grimshaw set out to test the theoretical line drawn on the map from the energy line dowsed on the 7th of October at Pitch Hill. It was decided from the beginning of the project that everything noticed would be recorded, no matter how irrelevant it might seem, in case it turned out later to have significance. For this first trip, we chose the long straight track near Shelwood Manor to the east of Pitch Hill. The bridle path had a dowsable energy line running along it, detected by all three present, but it wasn't in line with the original lay found. The Scots pines alongside the houses on either side of the road from the bridle path were noted. The energy line continued from the bridle path across the road and past the houses to the left in the drive to Shelwood Manor. Each house, besides having Scots pine clumps, also had two oaks, each facing the track. There was a dowsable energy line running between each pair of oaks, and holding a crystal here gave a tingle reaction in the fingers to Eileen and Jimmy. The energy line continued through the farm until at the big barn on the right, the straight track coincident with the original lay was met. Energy was dowsed by all three for quite some way along the track. A line was found at right angles to it, running along both sides of the hedge at the triangulation point. It was suspected that the drive to the farm, which is at an angle to the track, may have another energy line passing through the triangulation point and going on to what seemed to be a brown mark amongst the green vegetation on a distant hill. It was decided at some later date to try and investigate this by taking compass bearings, intersections and back compass bearings to find the spot on the hillside and douse there for energy. The mounds, clumps and triangulation point are all on an alignment running parallel with the entrance drive, but if, as this work seems to show, these lines have width, then it is coincident with the drive, as the rods would seem to indicate. At the second farm gate on the left from the big barn, which straddled the start of the straight track, Eileen and Jimmy dowsed the width of the energy line, and this width is shown as the line crossing the track at the top of the picture. This was 70 small footsteps wide and extended into the fields on both sides of the track. Facing Pitch Hill, the right side of the energy band extended just into the band at the side of the track, but on the left side it extended a considerable way into the field. At every intersection with field gates, Eileen noticed there were animal paths at right angles to the track. At the triangulation point there was an animal path through the hedge to the next field, in the middle of which was a fresh hole about 3 inches in circumference, possibly a rat or a snake hole. Eileen noticed a grey squirrel running along the track and disappearing between the first and second farm gates. All three then proceeded to the Church of St Mary Magdalene, South Holmwood, at the side of the A24 in direct alignment with the straight track and the original lay. The energy line was picked up at once in the lay-by to the side of the church lich gate. It was dowsed by Eileen as 70 larger footsteps, and it ran in a straight line directly up to the church and in line with its east-west axis. It felt stronger than on the straight track, but not as strong as it was at Pitch Hill. The church is not old. It was built in 1838, but it has the appearance and atmosphere of an older church. It has an interesting subconscious sighting story. 2 local ladies were watching some boys playing football on the spot and suddenly felt very strongly that there ought to be a church here. The fact that they were the ones able to bring this about suggests that there is conscious intelligence behind subconscious sighting. Inside the church, Jimmy had head hum and the line was dowsed by Gordon and Eileen. Gordon picked up a line at right angles to the axis of the church, between the first and second large windows from the altar. Eileen dowsed this too, and felt a strong point in the line on the step leading to the church tower from the aisle, and a strong point by the side altar by the font, and a line on the south side of the church. Jimmy had a small reaction from the sand jar. Outside, on the south side of the church, were a couple of unusually shaped Scots pines, noted by Jimmy, shaped seemingly like praying hands. Unusually shaped trees like this have often been noticed near powerful sites. On the following day, Sunday the 18th of November, Eileen continued dowsing at 3 further points on the Pitch Hill line. On the A281 near Selhurst Common, she found it difficult to dowse at first because of the heavy traffic, but still picked up the line, running along 2 hedges. At Hascombe it was easier to dowse, as it was a much more peaceful place. And on a minor road near Hayden's Ball, she found it was easy to dowse with one hand while driving, and picked up the line again as the car crossed it. This fountain at Hascombe is an ornate affair with an inscription saying Edward Lee Rowcliffe built it in remembrance of his brother Henry in AD 1877. On the 27th of December, Janet and Gordon Millington accompanied Eileen to dowse the energy line at Hascombe again. Gordon found the line began near to the fountain, about the middle of the lane, and continued along the B2130 for some distance southward, centring on the 30-mile-per-hour sign outside the village hall. It was too cold to check the line Eileen had found on November the 18th. On Saturday the 12th of January, it was a beautiful dry day with bright sunshine and folds of evaporating mist, when Eileen, Gordon and Jimmy, accompanied by Rob Stevenson of the London Earth Mysteries Group, arrived at Anstiebury Camp near Cold Harbour, south of Dorking. A grey squirrel scampered ahead of them as they entered the camp, a bleak area which had been heavily wooded, but which had been devastated by a gale. Many trees were uprooted, particularly large old yew trees. Clearing and felling work was obviously in progress. The fallen and cut wood was steaming in the warm sunshine, reflected in many puddles left by previous rainfall, and the beautiful, peaceful atmosphere gave a sense of tranquillity. A clump of Scots pines was passed on entering the camp. Gordon, Eileen and Jimmy dowsed a strong energy line with both copper and galvanised iron coat-hanger rods. The line ran north-south through the middle of the camp and seemed to be comprised of many distinct bands. It ran through the water tank under an earth mound which seemed to be at the hill's highest point. The windmill on the mound was turning briskly, casting dappled moving shadows on the surrounding vegetation and contributing to the special atmosphere. There was what seemed to be an archaeological dig, or the foundations for a building, mostly full of very muddy water, behind the water tank, which was just covered at one side of the energy line. Rob checked out the camp ramparts, confirming the total shape as an irregular oval, with fortifications or banks on 3 sides except the south, which had an escarpment. He reported that the entrance was either through the north or northeast side. Eileen walked part of the ramparts at 3 places on the southwest to the southeast side, and the north to the northeast side, and found that an encircling energy line was strongly pulling from the outside to the inside. At a place on the northeast bank, where some magnificent fallen yews were vigorously trailing new bright red roots from 10 to 15 feet in the air towards the ground, Eileen found an oddly shaped cut and worked bone in the hole left in the ground by a toppled yew. There was no sign whatever of the Pitch Hill line of energy, the E line as we'd come to call it, which the group had been tracking. The group then repaired to the old Plough Inn at Cold Harbour, whose sign announces that it's the highest pub in the southeast of England, for refreshment and warm-up. Sitting in front of a roaring log fire, Jimmy and Eileen both experienced a tingle quite markedly from Jimmy's new improved sand jar, a jar chosen to be a better shape for compression of all the sand, and filled with sand from near the Drakestone in Northumberland. Opposite the plough was a large brick-built water tank, partially covered by a mound of earth, and overlooked by a large old house with a clock on the wall facing the road. Keeping these on the left, the group walked up the lane through Berry Hill Woods, with Crocker's Wood cottages on the left. At the car park for the cottages, the energy line being tracked was picked up very clearly by everyone. Jimmy, at approximately 155 feet wide, 42 paces, at 2.5 feet each pace, Eileen paced it as 112 strides wide. Rob dowsed with a pendulum and strongly confirmed the middle of the line as consistent with the place indicated by Eileen and Jimmy. However, he found the width indicated by the pendulum to be less. Eileen and Jimmy experienced tingles from crystals as they approached the line and walked it. Everyone then returned past the plough, continuing up the hill to the east, and picked up the line again just north of the T-junction with the road to Anstibury Camp. Eileen and Jimmy dowsed it with the metal rods, Eileen measuring it as 69 strides wide. Gordon checked with the compass, finding that the energy line was running nearly east-west. Rob, using copper rods, confirmed with Eileen that the middle of the energy line centred on the "Children Please Drive with Care" sign at the east side of the road. An interesting point here was that whilst walking up the hill and reading the map, Jimmy had insisted that the E-line should be found just before the white cottage at the T-junction. Eileen replied that her dowsing rods were absolutely dead. While Jimmy and the others dowsed and consulted the map, Eileen found the line further up the road. Jimmy then discovered that he had been misreading the map. This is evidence for the conclusion that the energy line is something real and not just a psychological reaction, obtainable anywhere we expect to find a line to be. We were pleased to have this evidence of the line's existence and delighted to have Rob's independent confirmation of the findings. Everyone remarked on the beauty of the scenery and the number of yew trees between the plough and the white cottage. The group then returned to the church at South Holmwood, previously visited on November the 17th. The clock high up on the church was noted. The next destination was the crossing point of the E-line with the Roman road Staines Street. Following a footpath through the churchyard behind the church, the group crossed a lane, following a muddy footpath down a short hill, admiring a robin on the way, and turned left along the lane by a bridge over a stream. Taking the right-hand fork in the lane by some old cottages on the left, Jimmy and Eileen found that in places they were able to douse with copper rods a very weak response to the E-line, but that mostly the line ran to the south of the lane they were following. Passing through some gate posts with some lovely fallen wrought iron gates, the lane continued in a northerly loop through cottages on each side of the road to some stables and a large modern barn on the south side. Opposite this was a muddy, very narrow track, bounded on each side with wire fences and running straight from some woods to the lane, with a field on each side. The extraordinary thing was that in the middle and at the end near the woods, two mock Victorian gas street lamps had been erected in the eastern field, contrasting incongruously with the rural scene. Eileen dowsed with copper rods an energy line coincident with this narrow track, 24 paces wide. This was where the map showed Staines Street, the Roman road crossing the lane. A stable lad and girl came riding horses out of the stable, and on being questioned, the lad said he knew of no Roman road at all, and that what the group were looking at was a new footpath just been made. The girl directed us to a footpath further back to the east, saying that this was more likely to help us find a Roman road. The group worked out from the map that the dowsed line of Staines Street should cross the estimated path of the E-line just south of the new barn by the stables, but no one wanted to trespass on private land, so this was not confirmed. On the return walk to the church, Rob found that the stream was making a louder noise than on the outward journey. Rob, Eileen and Jimmy checked the church again. Jimmy found he could get no response from the sand jar, possibly because his hands were cold, but Eileen had a strong reaction from it by the font, and in a line to the side altar, and Rob also had a reaction from it. He also got a strong reaction from the pendulum, especially over the altar. Walking down the path to the A24 from the church, Eileen found herself tripped up by a twig, and Rob discovered that this was a branch twig with which he demonstrated the existence of the E-line up the path by dowsing with it. Dowsing reaction was found to be particularly strong at the Lich Gate. On Saturday the 17th of February it was a cold, bright, dry, sunny day, and there were still some patches of snow left on the ground in sheltered spots. At 4:06 p.m. Eileen travelled down the A286, dowsing in the car as far as Brook, where she turned right past the pub on the right. The rod crossed over, seeming to centre on a large house on the right near a stone bridge. Turning round shortly after, the rod reacted again, but in different places along the road, even up to the crossroads. Crossing over the A286 and taking the right-hand fork on a bend by the pond at Brook Dean, There was a strong reaction from the rod, which ended abruptly at a bridleway. Further along the road, at Kingwood, there was a reaction from the rod at a house, behind a hedge on the right, displaying a large clock. At the crossroads just beyond, there was a very strong reaction from the rod near a sign saying Donkey Sanctuary. A sign on the left read Sandhills Common, and the rod reaction dropped off past the public footpath on the left. A little way along here was a clump of Scots pines on the right, this being a very hilly road and very pretty. There was no reaction for quite some time until reaching the Surrey Heights residential home on the right at the end of a straight piece of road. This reaction ended just before the public footpath to the station on the right. There were quite a few Scots pines. On the sharp bend to the left there was a strong reaction, especially outside the unnamed big house like a stately manor on the left, and then a strong reaction immediately beyond it by the also unnamed unmarked church. This had a neat wire fence round it and appeared not to be in use. It had what looked like decorators' cloths piled in the porch. It was difficult to investigate as there was no car park on the narrow road. At the crossroads, Eileen turned right onto the A283 and then took the next left. There was no reaction for some time until a bend in the hill with a sign pointing to a narrow road on the right, to the church. This reaction continued just past the Merry Harriers pub on the left, just before the frozen pond on the right. Eileen went back to investigate the church, St. Peter's at Hambledon, which is on the E-line, and which was a short distance up the narrow lane on the left, past a farm and next to a row of cottages. The scene was very pretty, with an organ playing in the church. Continuing back along the road past the Merry Harriers, Eileen turned right at the phone box, following the sign for Hascombe and Dunsfold, and eventually found herself at Moor Pond Farm, which she had dowsed on a previous occasion. On the 16th of March, Ian Ames, Eileen Grimshaw, Jimmy Goddard and Gordon Millington went to look for the E-line at Holmbury Hill Fort. En route for the Hill Fort, Ian directed the party to the church at Ranmore Common. This proved to have some interesting energy lines running through it at right angles to each other, one set of lines or bands seeming to go towards Dorking. Everybody dowsed with rods. While the car was parked outside, a lady came out and inexplicably and wordlessly took a photograph of the car. Later the party went to Holmbury Hill, but in the torrential downpour couldn't find the hill fort, and so the field trip was abandoned, everyone going home soaking wet. On the 31st of March, Russell Dean and Jane and Eileen Grimshaw investigated St. James's Well, Holmbury Hill Fort, and St. Peter and Paul Redundant Church at Albury Manor. At St. James's Well, Jane and Russell dowsed for the first time. Everyone agreed a strong current of energy was around the well. This is the pattern that was found. Everyone used rods and crystals to dowse and agreed the results. The party then went to Holmbury Hill Fort and started searching around for the E-line. There were a great many holidaymakers about and it was difficult to dowse unobtrusively. Suddenly a guinea fowl, or a little brown bird, appeared walking on the path. Eileen told Jane to follow it, which she did. The bird kept stopping and clucking to Jane and waiting for her to catch up, and led her down the path to the edge of the middle ramparts of the fort. It led her first through the undergrowth, where it stopped by an abandoned Fanta can and wouldn't move. When Jane tried to pick the bird up, it hopped through the undergrowth a couple of feet back to the path leading down the hillside, and stopped again on the last rampart of the fort. It refused to move from there, and indeed was still there on the ground when we finally left. On this spot the E-line was easily dowsed. Russell took compass bearings, checked against the map, and everyone dowsed the same line, taking bearings on the trees, 2 large yew trees and Scots pines in a clump nearby, helping each other through the fallen trees and undergrowth. It seems the E-line just skirts the edge of the ramparts of the fort to the southeast, at 253 degrees. Later Jane found we'd parked the car in the middle of the car park, aligned nearly due south with an energy line running between the fort and the car park. She joked that this was an example of subconscious parking. It was a sunny, hazy day on the 13th of April when quite a large group of people went to Gibbet Hill, Hindhead. These comprised Russell Dean, Jimmy Goddard, Eileen Grimshaw, Gordon Millington, Rob Stevenson and Sybil Webster. The party followed the footpath from the public car park at the Devil's Punch Bowl back towards Guildford and found a memorial stone commemorating the murder of a sailor on the left overlooking the road, and proceeded to Gibbet Hill on the right. A derelict wayside cross or metal finger post approximately 8.5 feet high was found on the way, with dowsable energy all around it. A 12-foot high Iona cross in granite had been erected on the site of the old gibbet, with the following inscription: Post tenebris lux, post obiter salus, in ubitu pax, in luce spes. This translates, according to Gordon, as after shades light, in light hope, in death peace, after death safety. The base of the cross was older, 2 feet across, comprising blocks of stone which had been reworked and showed signs of metal, bars or hooks. It was surmised that this must have been the base of the gibbet. There was a benchmark on the stone footing. 255 degrees was found as magnetic line through the Celtic cross. Jimmy had head hum at the gibbet. There was also a triangulation point on the hill where Jimmy had a sand jar reaction. Everybody dowsed with rods. An energy line 20 paces wide was dowsed from the trig point, 23 paces to the Iona cross. Many people had finger tingle using crystals at the trig point. The party then continued on the footpath at the side of the A3 road in the direction of Guildford, around the edge of the Devil's Punch Bowl. The Woking Mosque line was dowsed where the footpath crossed the A3, in a straight line along the footpath, over the road and straight up the hill on the Punch Bowl side. At the top of the hill, the track carved a dramatic white line as a scar in the chalk, visible for a long distance, and marking significantly the Woking Mosque line. It was 10 degrees from true north on the compass. The E-line was crossed on the footpath before this point, but it was impossible to mark the spot, owing to lack of landmarks there. There seemed to be a great many points of energy all around Gibbet Hill and the edge of the Punch Bowl. To find the E-line, it was necessary to douse selectively, asking only that the rods pick up that line and ignore other energy lines. Returning towards the car park along the road at the edge of the escarpment marking the Punch Bowl, the E-line was picked up by dowsing, 253 paces measured by Jimmy from the mosque line. It was 37 paces wide, measured by Eileen, and 60 paces measured by Jimmy, at the point where a minor road led, according to the signpost, to the youth hostel from the A3 road. The party later went to the museum in Haslemere and asked to see a piece of the gibbet alleged to be housed there. Although the staff instituted a long search, they were unable to locate this artefact, but they were sure it was around somewhere. They refuted our suggestion that someone might have taken it home with them. Later, everyone except Gordon went to the church at Hambledon, where the E-line was again dowsed. The lime kiln by the side of the E-line was noted, and the ancient yews in the churchyard were dowsed for age. These yielded ages of 900 to 1,000 years for Jimmy and Eileen using rods. Russell and Phil climbed the inside of the hollow one. As a wedding service was in progress, it was impossible to enter the church. Gordon, Russell and Phil then left the party, and everyone else went to St. Peter's Church at Hascombe, where they were struck with the beautiful, rich and ornate paintings on the walls in the church, depicting Peter's fishing net with associated symbology. The dove set in the very ornate roof represents the Holy Spirit. On the 11th of May we went to Leith Hill, where another line drawn by Eileen from Holmbury Hill passes. The weather was fine but damp and misty, and very little view was visible. The people present were Lionel Beer, Jimmy Goddard, Eileen Grimshaw and Gordon Millington. A cuckoo was heard at Leith Hill, where the tower was found to be shrouded in scaffolding and building works were in progress. It wasn't possible to enter the tower, and few rhododendrons were in flower. Lionel studied the map and confirmed the alignment with Ranmore Church Tower, and he pointed out the landscape alignments with points of intervisibility distorted by the lines of the hills. The tower seemed to be surrounded by 2 circular earthworks. The party made a wide sweep to the south and east of the tower, noting the presence of what seemed to be a circle of mature monkey puzzle trees all round the tower. Most of these had been blown down by the gales, but quite a few were surviving in a horizontal position. The party then walked through the woods in a northerly direction, with Lionel pointing out where mining or digging had previously taken place, presumably for the sand. The footpath followed showed evidence of having previously been a paved, perhaps industrial route. On the road at the foot of Leith Hill, the E-line was doused by rods by Eileen and Jimmy to the west of the entrance for High Ashes Farm. Then the party left for the spot where the older OS map had shown a gap to exist between plantations along the E-line route, whilst the newer map showed this to be overgrown. A horseshoe was found at the edge of a field en route for the trees, and many rabbits were in the hedgerows. Cuckoos were heard, and the weather was cloudier and chillier. At the second wood on the map, by a gate, the E-line was suddenly encountered very strongly by Eileen, who felt the energy at chest height, making it difficult to breathe. A pond was noted in the hedge on the south side of the line, which Eileen felt to be rather malignant. Gordon waited at this spot, and the others continued. Jimmy was dowsing on the track through the wood, and his rods were twirling in circles very strongly. Eileen also dowsed and felt the energy very strongly. The pictures from this point on became inexplicably blurred. On the right, in Bell Copse, she found a very beautiful bluebell wood, and everyone enjoyed the peace and tranquillity, as well as the scent of this spot. She also found one white bluebell growing. Lionel pointed out that the water table in this area seemed to be very high. Continuing along the track, it was found that the E-line took in the entire width of the track, even allowing the path to meander and curve somewhat within its boundaries. A row of trees had been planted on both edges of the track, which were not yet mature, and within these on each side a newer row of saplings had been planted. At the T-junction with the farm track to Bures Manor, Jimmy measured the width as being 65 strides wide. Eileen made it 87 paces wide, being 50 paces from the south edge of the dowsed middle of the line. Lionel found a huge old oak tree marking the southern boundary of the line. He also discovered what he thought may be the ruin of a Victorian ice house in its roots. Jimmy subsequently wrote to Bures Manor and discovered that it was in fact an old lime kiln. Opposite this, on the Bures Manor track, was a younger but still large oak. There were many oaks in the vicinity, and some children who came by on their bikes told us that the ruin was an air raid shelter. On the return journey after the pond, Eileen noticed that the edge of the E-line, as dowsed with rods, was marked on the south side of the field by a large oak. On the 8th of June, Eileen and Jimmy went to investigate the crossing points of the E-line with the Hurt Wood Lay and C.E. Street's London Lay. At Lonesome Lane, where we parked the car, a mock Victorian lamp standard was found in the garden of number 41, a house called Farley Hay. This seemed to mark the south edge of the line. Whilst dowsing in the lane, a milkman seemed to become rather disturbed by our activities, and turning his milk float around, suddenly drove back the way he'd come. The line was very powerful at this spot, and Jimmy and Eileen both dowsed with rods. Eileen found separate dowsable bands within the line, which was 280 paces wide along the road. The first band was at 40 paces, walking back towards Reigate, the second at 40 further paces for the next 80 paces, and force was very strong. Jimmy measured 109 paces to this spot against Eileen's 120. At a further 80 paces, a third band of energy was felt. Jimmy measured a further 110 paces to the footstile, and 182 paces to the end of the line. Eileen felt the temperature change near the footpath marker. Following the footpath, the party set out to track the E-line through the plantations shown on the older OS map as having a gap, whereas the newer OS map showed no gap where the E-line had been drawn. Walking through the woods, Jimmy remarked how beautiful the tree canopy was, giving the impression of a cathedral. Jimmy had slight head hum, and Eileen felt tingles when a boat-shaped depression on the north side of the line was found on the ground. This may have been a dried-up pond. The wood was mainly old beech. There were many wood pigeons about, and fox runs and deer paths were noted. The energy was very strong, and it was easy to follow the E-line, but after some time both members of the party became disorientated and found it difficult to judge where they were in relation to the maps. For quite some distance the line ran alongside a cleared gap in the woods which seemed to be pastures. Then the angle seemed to change. Later it was found that electricity towers ran up the middle of the E-line, and the woods had been cleared for these, but a new growth of unidentifiable undergrowth was starting to cover the gap. The party then went to Tollgate Evangelical Church, in the middle of the E-line and incongruously set between large blocks of flats and a petrol garage. Jimmy thought this was an example of subconscious sighting. A notice in the ground told us it was affiliated to the FIEC. In fact, many modern churches have been found to align with Leys, and the possible significance of this is discussed in the booklet The Hidden Unity, published by Surrey Earth Mysteries Group. The party then went to Christchurch at King's Cross Lane in South Nutfield, the point where the E-line crosses the Hurtwood track lay. The church had a clock on the tower, and a notice on the door directed us to a house opposite where a small girl provided us with the key. Outside, Jimmy dowsed for the Hurtwood line and found it, but Eileen got an incorrect answer from her dowsing. Outside, the E-line dowsed as 183 Eileen paces wide along the pavement opposite the church. There seemed to be strong pull down the footpath at the side of the church, but this was not investigated. Inside, the church felt very powerful, especially by the altar and by the font. Jimmy had strong head hum by the altar, Eileen had goose pimples. A notice told us that a Clarissa Woollerton, whose photo was displayed, had had something to do with causing the church to be built in 1888. In spite of a notice offering church histories, there were none to be found. The party then left for the place where the E-line crosses Chris Street's north-south line on the map. This was found to be in a sheep field in what looked as if it had been country parkland, very beautiful, rolling very gently down from some hills in the distance. It was too misty to see far. The street line was easily dowsed along the side of a field, being 85 Eileen paces wide, 80 Jimmy paces, with 4 detectable bands of energy very strong. It aligned with a gap in the trees on the distant hill to the north. The E-line, more or less at right angles to it, dowsed as 150 Eileen paces, 135 Jimmy paces wide along another hedgerow. The point where the two lines crossed was in the middle of a field and was not dowsed, as we didn't wish to trespass in the open. Following the E-line down the hedgerow past the street line, a boat-shaped large pond was noted among some trees on the north edge of the line. There was a dead magpie laid out beside it. A large oak was leaning over the pond and towards the ley. There were also hawthorns and other oaks, and a smaller tree spiralling at the edge of a pond leaning towards the ley. Jimmy observed that he had often noticed this effect in trees, being attracted towards leys. Eileen remembered the large mature beeches spiralling and twisting alongside Wayland's smithy tomb near the Uffington White Horse at Pewsey. Whilst leaning on the fence and looking at the spot where the two leys crossed, Eileen noticed between 5 and 8 long-necked birds which she thought to be Canada geese, but Jimmy thought were swans, flying in a row one behind the other from the north down the street line. When they reached the E-line above the field before the pond, they abruptly made a right turn and flew off in an arrow-shaped formation west along the E-line. A gentle ridge of hill ran west-east, behind the farm on the horizon. To the south, west and east the land was flat but sloping. On the return journey, a large friendly brown horse in the field came to investigate and tried to eat Jimmy's camera. It snorted loudly through its nose when it reached the centre of the E-line, which we were following. The party then went to find the spot where the street line crossed the Leith Tower line, and a Roman villa is marked on the map. Eileen got confused dowsing, and we weren't sure if we found the right spot, but both Jimmy and Eileen got a strong dowsing reaction when asking for the spot of the Roman villa. This seemed to be in the corner of a cultivated field, and dowsing indicated that there were buried artefacts beneath the soil. We didn't dig. The footpaths were very overgrown, and a man searching in the lodge house gave us permission to walk in the school grounds if we wished. On the 17th of July, Eileen and Jimmy went to confirm the position of an unmarked marker or standing stone on Horsell Common. The weather was fine and sunny, and Jimmy led the way to where he had previously found what seemed to be a very small marker or standing stone by a pond alongside a pathway. This was just past where he said was the location described by H.G. Wells in his book The War of the Worlds, where the Martians descended to Earth. The small stone was found to be still leaning to one side of the path, and both dowsed the location with rods. It was found that one of the lays from Woking Mosque runs through the stone from the pond, and the stone leaned towards the next marker on the line, which is a tumulus. The energy line seemed to follow the dried bed of a stream alongside the stone on the other side of the track from the pond. Both then dowsed the sandy hollow described by H.G. Wells. Jimmy had headhum in the hollow, and Eileen found a strong power spot on Danewell Hill alongside the hollow amongst the Scots pines there. 3 energy lines were dowsed, one on the far side of the hollow, which Jimmy said he knew to exist on the map, and one along the path which led to the small marker or standing stone. This is a map of the energy lines we found here. On Saturday the 20th of July, Charles and Jill Refoy, Lionel Beer and Jimmy Goddard visited the E-line again at the Devil's Punch Bowl. We dowsed the line as being 90 paces wide, and also went on to other tracks that it crossed, one of which Lionel thought was the original road, as the distance between the hedges seemed to indicate this. This was found to be true. It was a beautiful scene with heather and bilberries and the sound of grasshoppers. We next went to Boundless Copse on the corner of a nearby minor road. There was a narrow line going through it, although the E-line itself crossed the road about 100 yards down. Jimmy's line was drawn on the map as going through Boundless Copse. This confirms that this is slightly out, and that the one Eileen drew is the correct one. The edge of the line was at yet another eerie stagnant pond. Also a stream goes under the road at one point, in the width of the E-line, and there is a large multiple beach there. There is a very ornate gate into a field there too. The pillars had decorated bosses, and there was a metal insignia of some kind in the centre of the gate, a 5-pointed star within a circle, and inside that a letter P surmounted by a crown. This sketch of it is by Lionel Beer.
Thanks. If a wind wave. One side. This is only on one side. Have a look, Richard. It doesn't continue. It doesn't continue. Look.
Just one side of the circle?
Just one side of the circle.
This side is...
And look how the corn's laid down.
Yes.
You know, it's not been trampled. It's been laid in a regular...
On this side. The circle continues round.
This takes my breath away. Right, let's go.
Eileen called the pentagram in the punch bowl the Dod, as the shape reminded her of a snail. The party went back along the road towards Winchester and observed another circle in the field on the right. The other people had said it had been there about 3.5 weeks. The party then had a look at the Tree of Life pentagram opposite the strawberry kiosk, but were unable to decide if it was a fake or not. This was the shape as drawn by Eileen on the 27th of July when on a field trip with the London Earth Mysteries Circle. These crop pentagrams, apart from the Dodd circles, had been observed by Eileen and Jimmy and Peter Goddard on the London Earth Mysteries Circle field trip 2 days previously. Their relation to each other and the roads are thus. This map, showing alignments between this year's crop circles in the Cheeseford Head area and tumuli in the area, appeared in the circular of the Centre of Crop Circle Studies. The main finding of the Pitch Hill project has been the confirmation of this broad band of energy running across the southeast of England, and also of the rarity of such wide lays. The vast majority of lines, when dowsed, are only about 6 paces wide. Medium width lays are rarer, and we have not found another like the E line, not even the famous St Michael line. It's clearly something of importance, but what that importance is, we don't yet know. Some other findings out of the project too. One is there seems to be a rule that lays double in size at sunrise and sunset. 6 paces become 12, 10s become 20, and the E line here at South Holmwood grew to a massive 200 paces when dowsed near sunset.